Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Content is offered for information purposes only. Unless stated otherwise, any and all individuals participating in the video are third parties that include both professional investors and individual investors who may not be licensed or certified by any institute or regulatory body. Unless stated otherwise, the views or opinions expressed may not reflect those of Seeking Alpha as a whole. The accuracy and completeness of content shared cannot be guaranteed. Seeking Alpha does not take account of your objectives or financial situation and does not offer any personalized investment advice. Seeking Alpha is not a licensed securities dealer, broker, U.S. investment advisor, or investment bank. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of ETF Spotlight. I'm Daniel Snyder from Seeking Alpha. Today, we are lucky enough to be talking to Harrison Schwartz. He is going to take us into the world of platinum and palladium and what his opinions are in the space right now. Obviously, lots of focus on gold and silver and those commodities through the years, specifically more recently with a lot of worry out there. Maybe it's inflation, maybe it's debt, maybe it's government shutdown, whatever it might be. Right? But platinum and palladium have been kind of these silent lurkers over the years, and we're excited to jump into the conversation with him. So obviously, we're going to jump into an ETF, and today that will be PPLT. That's Aberdeen's Physical Platinum Shares ETF. And Harrison, I would love to hear the case of one. First, you've been writing on Seeking Alpha since 2018. How did you get into specifically these metals?
So I've always, for me, it's always been about how do we defend the portfolio? How do we make a portfolio that's robust against any situation, any all weather, right? So I always like alternatives. I'm always looking for alternatives because you get low correlations. And if you have a lot of things with low correlations, that lowers portfolio volatility. Platinum, for me, is great because it has relatively low correlations, but it gives you exposure to hedges against monetary risk. So dollar devaluation hedge, like gold, but under the radar. And I think that's really valuable because you get some more potential for alpha because it's not seen by most people. And so I look mostly for alternatives. I think platinum and palladium are very interesting for those reasons.
Well, so let's talk about this because I know most people think about, let's take gold, for example, when we mentioned gold. There's demand from central banks from around the world. Investors can kind of understand, okay, there's the buyer, there's the constant demand.
Yeah.
Where does the demand come from for platinum and palladium? What's the end product or what's the usage or what's the store of value? And how does that market kind of shape out?
Well, platinum is interesting because it's much like silver, where you get a mix of industrial demand and investment demand. There's not that central bank demand, which is something that maybe we'll see change, as the precious metals boom goes on. But we have a mixture of industrial demand, more industrial demand with platinum than we see with silver. So that gives you some exposure to the positive and negatives of the economy while also having a big hedge against inflation. Because ultimately, if things really drive up, all the precious metals will go up probably similarly, not just gold.
All right. So, but what about, let's talk about the supply aspect of it, right? We know how hard it is to kind of mine gold and that kind of adds to the source of value there. But is platinum and palladium, are those easier to mine? Where are they mined? What's the backdrop of the geography?
So platinum, what's interesting is it's somewhere around 1/30 as much abundant as gold. So there's far less platinum in the ground than gold. There's far less produced every year than gold. And it's mostly produced in South Africa. It's mostly produced by one company, Sibanye-Stillwater. So that gives you, one, if anything happens to these few mines in the world that produce it, that could mess up supply. And we're seeing that right now where the company Sibanye-Stillwater is cutting production because of lower prices. And that alone is enough to probably drive up a shortage of the metal. And on top of rising investment demand, I think that gives you a good catalyst for a long-term breakout of sustained shortage, even if industrial demand does not keep up.
So you mentioned Sibanye-Stillwater Limited, that's ticker symbol SBSW. Are they kind of like the power player of the market? Are they the OPEC plus of this realm?
They really are, because you get, the specific numbers I think people might want to look up, but I think it's around a quarter of all production comes from this one company. So they have a huge amount of movement in the market for both platinum and palladium. And South Africa in general is very concentrated in that market. So if you see tariffs, if you see any trade issues, all of a sudden, how are we going to get this metal? And where else does it come from? Russia. So it's not seen in great abundance outside of countries where the trade stability is a little bit less strong than we usually see with other metals.
Now, you had mentioned that the Platinum ETF PPLT is actually one of your top investment picks all the way out to 2030. Why do you have the conviction to go that far in advance? I mean, it's almost just only 2026 right now, right? So you're talking about multi-year call here.
Yeah. And truthfully, my bullish conviction has not changed much over the past 5 years or however long I've been looking at this, because to me, it's as an investor, I always want to look long term. I always want to think like, what I think you can make the most alpha by thinking 10 to 20 years in the future. So 10 years in the future, we know that there's going to be some difficulty with financing the government. We're seeing more dovish monetary policies or quick cuts of interest rates, things like that, which could definitely push inflation a bit higher than we've seen over the past 20 years or past 40 years, really. And so I think long term, I expect higher demand for investments for inflation hedges. Platinum, I think, is a really good pick for your retail investor, not necessarily your central bank. So I think there's a great deal of upside there.
Now, what do you think about you had added this great chart in your last article on this ETF. It's a comparison between the gold price and platinum price, right? And if I just look at the chart, I can kind of see like there's a massive spike back during the GFC and then a massive dip and like crazy volatility all the way. It looks up into like 2011, 12, 13 maybe, and then kind of a steady pullback over the years where we haven't even surpassed that all-time high. So how do you feel like we're going back to all-time highs? Are we going back and soaring above them? Are we going to go back and consolidate there? What are your thoughts?
So truthfully, I think the road back to that parity ratio we saw in the 2000s may be slow, because since then there's been more EVs, less demand for diesel vehicles. So that lowers industrial demand in the short term. I think that we're seeing more industrial demand growth from medical and other like hydrogen fuel cells, other technologies, that we're kind of seeing industrial demand level off and stabilize, not grow sharply. I really think the growth is going to be from the investment side. And that remains speculative because that depends on having more monetary volatility that we've seen as over the past year. So I think that's likely.
So your case, if I understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is the price of platinum palladium will go up because it will be a store of value similar to gold, right? Which people traditionally flock to. Nowadays, we also have Bitcoin as well, right? So do you feel like, I mean, is there a case? It seems like people want to consolidate into one, maybe two sources of value in times of trouble. I mean, why do we start diversifying 3, 4, 5, and then, do you get what I'm saying? Where if you lose the consolidation, you might lose the additional value on top of it.
Well, the way I'd say it is, we know a lot of companies need platinum for industrial uses. So inflation rises, the cost of producing it will rise, as we've seen. And if the cost of producing it rises, then less will be produced if the price doesn't rise too. So I think that there's no reason to say we need to go on one thing only. Anything that we're seeing demand is existing and the cost of production is rising with inflation, with global inflation, that will ultimately push things up. Whether or not, gold, I can see gold should move first because gold is the most robust hedge against inflation. But your other metals like platinum, palladium, even copper, all will in the long term should rise according to their cost of production. And really, you're hedging an increase in cost of production primarily.
All right. So let's talk to investors real quick before we start to wrap things up here. You mentioned this is mainly found in Russia. It's mainly found in South Africa. Like, to me, that sounds risky, right? Is that the biggest risk for this space, or are there other risks that you also think about in the back of your mind?
Bullish or bearish risks?
Let's go with both.
Okay. So I definitely think on the supply side, absolutely, there's that trade risk and production risk with either of those two areas. And that's bullish as an investor because that supply is, as like the strategic metals or rare earth metals, once you don't have that supply, all of a sudden those prices soar right up. So that's a supply side risk that's bullish. Risk. So, of course, if we see a change in policy and fiscal monetary policy, that is really strong to defend the US dollar and push inflation down. That would moderate the trend in precious metals. I don't think that's likely, but that's where I would say is the greatest risk in all precious metals right now, especially because we've seen prices rise so much in gold.
All right. So let me ask you this. I'm looking at PPLT here, the ETF on Seeking Alpha. And I noticed that really the price increase started kind of around May 20th, beginning of June this year. What has been happening since that moment? Because tariffs were in April. Is that when South Africa and tariffs dispute happened? What was the event there where this started to increase? You know, I think it's up 71% year to date.
I think the market is realizing that there is a supply shortage in the short term and probably the long term. We've seen Sibanye-Stillwater production cuts for platinum and palladium due to low prices, primarily for palladium, but that lowers production for platinum because they're mined together. So I think that alone is driving higher prices, and then we're seeing more market realization of this as a long-term trend on top of higher investment demand. Gold soared, since last year, and now people are saying, oh, hey, what else can I get into that might have similar profile to gold? Platinum's a great choice. Decent choice. I would say it's a great choice with more industrial risk.
Well, so let's go with that. Great choice versus decent choice. It also leads me to think about how much of a portfolio allocation should be within this space. So what would you say? I mean, is this like a 5% sort of like, BlackRock came out and said crypto 5%, like 5, 10, 15, or are you saying let's swing the bat and let's go 30, 35?
Say the one thing I'd say is the cost of production of platinum is very close to its current price. So for me, the long-term downside risk is pretty low. I would be surprised to see prices go lower than they had been last year. So that gives you low risk, but could allow for a higher portfolio position. For me, I would keep the lower portfolio position, diversifying to a few metals. This is, I think, the largest metal position I would have because I think it's undervalued compared to the other metals. But yeah, 5, 15, probably no more than 15.
All right, Harrison, let's go ahead and wrap it up there. Everyone, PPLT, this is the platinum and palladium side of things. Obviously, go follow Harrison Schwartz here on Seeking Alpha. Harrison, I hope you continue to write about this space. I find it fascinating. I know many others do as well. Thank you for joining the program this week. Everyone, this has been another excellent episode of ETF Spotlight, and we'll see you again here next week. Take care.